Greetings, trombonists at large. I am the Vagrant Trombone, here in more terrible lighting, to try to talk to you about something that I should have mentioned already. We have talked about the bits and bobs and boodles of the trombone mouthpiece. The second part of our trombone, which is the trombone slides. And today I want to discuss, as you well know, the third major component of our trombone, which is the bell section. The bell section. So, let's get started. So, as you know, I have a video about trombone mouthpiece and all the bits and bobbies and things and different things as we play our instrument. We press our face to the rim of the mouthpiece, and there's the bite of the mouthpiece, the undercut, the contour of the rim down to the shoulder, to the drill, to the straight section, and out the back bore of the mouthpiece, which goes into the lead pipe, which is on the inside, completely enshrouded within the, if I can ever unscrew this, it's got a million threads on it, into the top cork barrel, which supports the upper inner slide tube, which then travels down into the taper of the slide tube, the cork barrel, not the cork barrel, the stocking, excuse me, cork barrel, stocking. I did that on the last video too. Oh, never mind. Into the outer upper slide tube, into the lower bow, the slide bow of the trombone. I call this a crook. It's not a crook. It's a bow. Past the vent hole, into the lower slide tube, into the lower stocking of the inner slide tube, up into the lower cork barrel, and then it comes out here at the male connector, which enshrouds the true bore of your trombone slide, which is the bore of your trombone. In this case, this is a 500 bore trombone slide, and it enters into that mystical bit known as the bell section. Now, the bell section has a number of bits and bobs and pieces to it as well. I'm trying to find some place to put this slide so I don't drop it on the floor. There we go. So the bell has its bits and bobs and pieces as well. It has the female connector, which the slide connects to. Now, in original trombones, the old sack butts and things like that, this is a press fit, meaning they just jammed it in there and hoped it would stay on, and sometimes it would end up doing one of these, as well as some of our horns do today. So now we have threaded pieces that hold it together, but it enters into the receiver, the female receiver, for the bell section, which is typically connected to the bell hand brace, or the thumb brace on the bell, or the main brace, some people call it. And then it goes up into, in this case, this horn doesn't have one. Let me get a different bell. Into the gooseneck of the bell section, which travels up into the tuning slide, and it enters into the bell bow. Okay, this is not a crook, this is a bow. I misnamed those a couple of times too, where it expands into the other side of the expansion tube for the tuning slide. It travels past the brace and into the tail of the bell. Now, we call this the bell section. This is the bell, okay? It goes into the tail of the bell, down the taper to the throat of the bell, and then the bell flare, and then your sound goes splattering all over your guests, friends, family, and neighbors, or whomever happens to be within earshot or face shot of your trombone. And that's the bell section. Ta-da! Okay, well, let's talk a little more in depth about it. This is called the gooseneck or the neck pipe. The reason why it's called the gooseneck or the neck pipe is because, well, obviously it's on the neck. And it's curved, has a slight bow to it. It has a slight curvature to it. It also expands. Now, on early trombones, this didn't expand if there was a tuning slide up here. It was just a straight tube. So it was called the neck pipe, not the gooseneck. It became the gooseneck when it expanded and gave it a little curve. Now, in early trombones, they also didn't have tuning in the bell. Oftentimes, they would have tuning in the slide. You would have extra bits on the slide, which would allow you to tune. But that's a topic for another time. So what we have is, after we pass here, now early trombones, again, like I said, they didn't have a tuning slide in the bell section that was in the slide. This would be a constant taper. And this was made of a single piece of tubing, which would then go to this joint right here where the bell taper starts. The bell taper on some trombones is one piece of metal that goes down to the bell flare right about here, and then they add the bell flare to it. That is a two-piece bell. This trombone is a Bach trombone, so it has a one-piece bell. This is all one piece of metal from the tail of the bell all the way to the bell flare. Now, the bell flare, there are different contours of bell flare. There are different sizes of throat. There are different things. All of these things are negotiable. And the main braces on the trombone, you have the tuning slide brace, you have the bell brace, and then you have the main brace, or the thumb brace. And this brace, as you can see, is curved because this trombone is convertible. So if this went straight across, it would be too far away from my thumb to grab, because there would be a trigger assembly here. Now, I could talk about the trigger assembly as being part of the bell section, as it is a part of the bell section, but it's also a modular part. So it actually is its own piece. The bell section does not necessarily have a valve on it. So this is considered a straight horn, even though it's all curvy, because it doesn't have that. So, and this is a convertible horn that can be removed. I can take this bell off if I wanted to. But that's not the point of this video. So once again, the air goes into the horn, travels up the gooseneck, around the tuning bow, into the tail of the bell, and out the bell flare. Now, at the bell flare at the end, to keep you from cutting your fingers, and because they found that it also adds acoustic properties, you have the bead, okay? Now, some beads have a wire in them. Some do not have a wire in them. Some of them are soldered, and some of them are unsoldered. I had a con-bass trombone. It had an unsoldered bead. I kept having to go back and get it crimped every now and then, as the wire inside the bead would start to buzz. You also have different kinds of beads. On this horn, this is called a flat or a French bead. I have a couple of Bach trombones that have this bead. Instead of a wire, which is round, they use a flat piece of metal, and they fold the metal over tighter. So the flare comes up and then folds back this way. There's a bit of an edge on here. On my other trombone, on my old Bach 6, it's much more pronounced. It's almost sharp on the edge, even though it folds over. And it is a leaded bead. And the lead in the bead, depending on how much or how little they put in, can change the acoustic properties of your horn. So can having a seam here, which is the difference between a one-piece and a two-piece bell. This horn has a two-piece bell. You can't really see the seam, though. On some of them, you can just see this very light, kind of a jig-jaggy thing, where they've seamed the bell, okay, on some horns. The taper, the tail of the bell, the taper and the throat of the bell are going to have a seam that runs this way, down the inside, and is usually on the inside, in part because it looks better, but also because that way the brace here, this brace, supports that seam. On a two-piece bell, the thinnest part of the bell is going to be right here, because this is one piece of metal that they fold around a mandrel, and then they seam it and solder it and braze it and put it together. And then when they add the flare is made out of one piece of metal, but as you can see, the metal disc is then pressed against a mandrel, so this part becomes the thinnest part. And if these bells fail, typically they'll fail right at the seam. Like, I knew a guy in high school who put a bell into his horn, and he just twisted it so hard that it actually crumpled his bell seam right here, and it actually wrinkled the bell. The flare started to twist, and it got all messed up. Now, on a one-piece bell, that's much less likely to happen because, as I said, this part of the bell on a one-piece bell isn't thinned out. It's not until you get to the edge of the bell. I've had problems with bells being too thin on the end on a one-piece bell, where I could actually like flex it and scrape my initials with my fingernail into it because the bell was so thin. I ended up having to return that horn because when the bell is improperly turned and one side is much thinner than the other, it'll never play right. They always play a little weird. And because some parts of the bell are thicker than other parts on two-piece bells than on one-piece bells, those create different acoustic properties too, as well as screw bells, which will have a threaded ring here, and you can screw them on. Those bells tend to have a kind of a heavy, fearsome sound to them. They're great for classical. I don't think it would work terribly well for commercial, but they sound great on classical music. That extra ring, which makes the bell kind of heavy, really gives it some oomph. It really holds it together. Now, there are a lot of things that we could talk about with the weight of bells, but that's not my purpose here today. Those are things that we can possibly talk about on another time. I just wanted to talk about the different parts of the trombone bell. Since I made one on mouthpieces and slides, I figured we better get this one covered too. So again, your air goes in here, goes through this doohickey, comes out through the male receiver into the female receiver, past the thumb brace, into what would be the gooseneck or the neck pipe, into the tuning bow, out the tuning bow into the tail of the bell, down through the taper, out the flare, past to the bead of the bell. That's about all I can talk about right now, and I can elaborate on more of it later. One of the things to remember, though, is that when you have tuning in the slide, this will be continually getting larger. When you have tuning in the bell, you've got these straight pipes, which are going to inhibit some of that. I don't know if that's in the picture. Inhibit some of the expansion. So you're going to have straight pipes. And you've also got these little air spaces, gaps, where the slide is going to be separated from the next tube. And as you can see on this trombone, it has opposing or reverse tubes. This tube is smaller, this tube is bigger. Then we go around, this tube is bigger, and this tube is even bigger than that as it flows into the tail of the bell. And on this trombone, it also does. This is a more modern Bach. On the old Bachs, though, this is reversed. Both of these tubes are the large ones, and both of these tubes are the small ones. Oh, no. Is it that way? I don't remember. I think both of these are small, and these two are big. Anyway, I'll just edit that out. Those are the parts of the trombone bell.